1 refitting. Spira Main Space Day 1, 2317. Vale inspected the stand he had just attached to the floor. As they had expected, the main deck Spira had been one large, empty space. There were lower decks, which held the communications relays and the fabrication/deployment area. Vale had declared those decks to be off-limits, except for maintenance. Above the deck with gate were 3 more decks. 2 decks up were the airlock and the bridge. The top and between decks were just empty space. Satisfied with the stand, he put the Malp remote the model with a screen in one of 2 specially designed slots. The other slot would hold the Mark II gate remote that Tzalo and Carlson had developed. He put the gate remote in. Then he took a pair of cables and set to connecting the remotes to the main power grid. There was a plug-in point in the floor. The 2 remotes were then connected to one another. Now all we need is the diagnostic console, and we have ourselves a gate room, he said. Almost done, Carlson said, who was working on the diagnostic console. I'm running the final checks now. Diagnostics on the diagnostics consoles, Vale said with a grin. They had turned the large space in smaller rooms by building frames of wooden beams with short metal pipes at each end. This was so they could be welded into place. Next, they had put fabric between the beams. There had been 3 layers of cloth, with space between them. They had then filled that space with a special foam the new Assurans had developed. It had hardened and made the walls as solid as they were going to get. Although if they could get enough material and a supply of nails, Vale intended to add a layer of wood over the outer layers of fabric. The gate room had 2 openings in the walls, one to the left, which lead to the jumper bay, and one directly across from the gate. They didn't have enough material to make doors in all rooms, but that was also on Vale's to-do list. It was through this passage that Jennifer Haley came in, and the look on her face was not encouraging. "Why do I have a feeling you are not about to give me good news?" Vale said. "I have finished the math on the life support," Haley began. "The number I got back was 120 permanent inhabitants, sir, which means we cannot move Colonel Young's crew here." "Great," Vale began. "Any good news?" "Nikita has started the program to crack the master code," Haley said. "He said that because this is the alpha site of the project, the code is probably not as complex as the one for Destiny, so it should be faster than cracking the original code was. Also, he figured that the reason this ship has only room for 120 people is because the official skeleton crew number for Destiny is 125. So the ancients considered 120 the cutoff point." "Yeah," Haley nodded. "Also, Porter has found the DSI network interface. She's already has the translation terminal up and running, so we can start sending things back and forth with Atlantis right away, and the refit work is on schedule. There should be enough room for all of the crew. But the rooms won't be very big or luxurious. So, what do you think we should do with the top deck?" It was a small deck located above the bridge and then stretching back towards the airlock. There have been several suggestions. "Well, I think we'll need a briefing room, but we need all the space we have down here," Haley said. "And there should be just enough space left for a locker room so that the teams can gear up there as well." "Do it." "Yes, sir." Haley nodded and walked out, while Vale returned his attention to the gate room. Spira Vale's quarters day 2, 0405. Vale closed the door behind him. It was not really a door, but a flap of fabric. The refit was on schedule, and he needed sleep. As Haley had said, the room was indeed small and bare. His bags were against one of the walls, but he decided that he would unpack them later. He took off his shoes and coveralls. Then he got rid of his watch and lay down. He woke up 4 hours later. Tilda better, much better. Tilda he rubbed his eyes and sat back up. Tilda time to unpack those bags. Tilda. He began unpacking his bags. The bulk of the stuff in there was standard issue gear, but one of the bags had personal stuff. There was a picture of his old search and rescue unit. Next came his old Roman uniform and sword. He took the sword from its sheath and ran his finger across it. The sword was still sharp. "Tilda, hello, old friend." Tilda, he smiled and put it back. The next object was a folder with several blueprints. He had one of the beta site, one of Nova Roma, one of Atlantis, one of Destiny, and one of Level 28 of Stargate Command. Finally, there was a leather bomber jacket he had gotten from a World War II veteran called Victor Peterson. Peterson had been one of his neighbors in New York. When he had died, he had left the jacket to Vale in his will. "I wonder what you would say if you knew about this mission, Victor." The old man probably would have volunteered for the mission, Vale realized with a smile. His room was just a few millimeters wider than the length of his bed. So he stood on his bed as he mounted the blueprints above it with tape. Next, he mounted his sword closer to the door. He taped the sheath to the wall at an angle so that the sword did not fall out. Finally, he taped the photo across from the sword. There was a locker from him to put his old uniform and the bomber jacket into. He put the helmet at the bottom of the locker. Finally, he put his 3 spare uniforms in there. The rest of the stuff would end up in the ship's supply room once they had it. He had just closed his locker when there was a knock at the door. "Enter." Aronov, Haley, and Porter came in. They all appeared a bit more relaxed than usual. Now that they were aboard the Spira, they could let their guard down a bit. Aronov was carrying a clipboard with a pile of paper. "We've got a problem, sir," he said. "We don't have enough space." "How bad is it?" "We don't have room for the hydroponics bay, mess hall, infirmary, isolation ward, and kitchen." He gestured at the room. "And you know that the quarters are not really roomy either." Vale nodded. Besides, the bed and the locker, there was no furniture in the room. He figured that his room was 2, maybe 3 square meters. It had still not been easy to fit everybody on the 2 decks they had to work with. Vale scratched his face and walked out of his room, with the others following him. "Okay, what's the layout now?" "I made you some blueprints," Aronov said. "They're crude, but you'll get the point." He studied the blueprints and realized that they had not wasted any space. The ship was simply too small. If they had made it here aboard Nova Roma, they would have been able to expand the ship. However, because they had lost the tower, that was not an option. And without these rooms, long-term survival would be a lot harder. Fortunately, they had realized that this might happen and had come up with a plan B. "Okay, break out the rabbit seed and plug it in." "Yes, there is something about that," Porter said. "We can do it, but it will cost us the airlock. We'll have to start on the bridge deck, grow through the airlock, and then up. So we won't be able to dock with Destiny if we get there the old-fashioned way." "One problem at a time," Vale said. "Get started." "You're the boss." Porter nodded and turned to Aronov. "Nikita, can you give me a hand?" "Sure." Porter and Aronov left. It would take several days to grow the expansion, but they had brought enough food and water for several weeks, so they would be fine. He turned to Haley. "Will we have enough power for all the equipment in the expansion?" "Yes," she said. "The real sticky part is getting the expansion inside the FTL field, so it doesn't get ripped off when we go in and out of FTL. We'll basically have to build an extra FTL module and tune it in with the existing drive. And any leftover power will have to be channeled into the current drive as well." "If anybody can do it, you can," Vale said. "Thank you, sir. If you need me, I'll be on the bridge." Haley nodded and Vale headed towards the bridge. There were 2 spiral staircases which connected the decks, along with a platform lift. The lift was too small to hold the puddle jumpers, but they had modified the unit into a means for moving wounded. He reached the bridge deck. The space between the bridge and the airlock was filled with supplies. They were on shelves and in lockers. Then he reached the bridge itself. It was separated from the rest of the ship by an airlock door, which opened as he approached. "Nice," he said. He had not been on the bridge yet, so he took his time exploring the place. The rear section of the room had 3 consoles, which were connected to a central device. This was not a console, but some kind of cooling and connection hub. There were a couple of steps down to the forward section. First came the command chair. It was a chair flanked by 2 C-shaped control panels. Vale ran his hand across the control panel. Tilde nice. Tilde. The chair was empty, so he sat down in it. In front of the command chair was a much larger C-shaped console. This console had 3 stations, each of which its own chairs. The left and middle consoles were the science consoles, while the right one was flight control. The engineering functions were all handled by the 3 consoles in the rear section. Finally, there were 2 sets of steps flanking the science and flight control set. These led to the most forward section of the bridge. There were 2 L-shaped consoles here. The right one was flight control 2, while the left one was a tactical station. This section also had 2 windows. These could be protected by closing a pair of blast shutters. Vale leaned back in the command chair. Part of him still couldn't believe that he was out here in the middle of nowhere in command of a spaceship, with some of the crew being aliens. "You have come a long way," a voice said, "in more ways than one." He turned to see his mother, Octavia Valerius the Elder, standing in the rear section. Vale got up and approached her. The woman who was standing there looked like his mother, but there was something different about her. He tried to touch her, but his hand passed through her. And then he remembered that destiny was run by an artificial intelligence. So why would Spira not have such a program as well? "Spira, I presume." "Always on guard," Octavia said with a smile. "But yes, I am Spira's artificial intelligence." "Not I mind the company," Vale began. "But why are you here? Destiny's AI only showed up after we cracked the master code, and we're still working on that." "Well, the ancients whom programmed me figured that, when I had to get to work, things would be pretty bad," she said, "since I am what you call the AlphaSite of the project." "Makes sense to me," Vale said. "So, anything specific you wanted to talk about?" "No," Octavia said. "I just wanted to say hello, but you will see me again, Colonel." And with that, she faded out. Vale smiled and walked out of the bridge. There were 80 people aboard Spira, but it was now crystal clear that the old girl had a mind of her own. Yes, this would be a very different mission. To visit Pentagon Homeworld Command Day 8, 0758. President Robert Mackenzie walked into General O'Neill's office. He was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. Also, he had told his Secret Service agents to wait outside of Homeworld Command. O'Neill got to his feet. "Mr. President." "Jack, let's do this." The 2 of them headed for the communications room. There were 2 chairs waiting for them, along with 2 ancient stones and a communications device. They sat down. Mackenzie picked up one of the stones and looked at O'Neill. Tilde okay, swapping bodies with somebody millions of light years away. Tilde O'Neill put his stones on the device, and he followed suit. His body felt weird for a bit, and then... Spira Briefing Room Day 8, 0800. He was in a room what was clearly of ancient design. He spotted a mirror and saw his reflection. The face of Dr. Nikita Aronov looked back at him. Alec Carlson was also in the room, along with Colonel Vale and Major Haley. As he looked around, he realized that he was in the briefing room. He was sitting at an oval table with 6 chairs. Carlson was sitting next to him, while Vale and Haley were standing. He turned to Carlson. "Jack, you in there?" "I am here, sir." "Welcome aboard the Spira, sirs," Vale said. "Colonel," O'Neill said. "So, you think it's appropriate to have a general appear as a civilian?" "Sorry about that, sir," Vale began, but the IOA representatives wanted an update on the refit. Carlson and Aronov drew the short straw and had to go, sir. Well, that and everybody else was busy. "Shall we get moving?" Mackenzie said. "Yes, sir," Vale said. O'Neill and Mackenzie stood up, after which Vale led them out of the room. Mackenzie had a feeling that this was going to be a very interesting day. Spira Bridge Day 8-0914. Spira was indeed a very interesting vessel. The Wraith expansion was done. This was because on the third day of the mission, the ship had recharged in a star. They had channeled a massive amount of power into growth after this. This had allowed them to complete the growth yesterday. Now the crew was busy installing the gear and getting the new rooms up and running. It had not escaped Mackenzie's notice that even with the expansion Spira was extremely cramped. They had just walked onto the bridge when there was an alarm. Porter was sitting at one of the science stations. She turned to Vale. "Colonel, we just broke the master code." "Excellent timing," Vale began. "Dr. Porter, President Mackenzie, and General O'Neill." "General, Mr. President," Porter said with a nod. "So," Mackenzie began, "does that mean we have full control of the ship now?" "Yes, sir," Porter said, while hitting some keys. "And we should also be able to calculate our position along Destiny's course now." She hit several more keys. "The computer says that it should take about a minute, sir, but we do know that we are a couple of galaxies behind Destiny, sir." The door opened, and Tizalo came in. At first, Mackenzie had been surprised at the sight of the Ursini and Nakai members of the crew, especially since they were in the Nova Roma expedition uniforms, but now he was used to it. Because the new Asurans were so human-like, they actually looked very natural in the uniforms. "General, Mr. President," he said, "rumor had it that I can finally get to work flying this beauty." "You sure can, Sarge," Vale said, before he turning to Mackenzie. "He is the best pilot we have, so I made him chief." "Shouldn't there have been a memo?" O'Neill said. "Makes sense to me," Mackenzie said, getting him a look from O'Neill. "What? You want him to promote to the worst pilot?" "There's that." There was a beep, indicating that the calculation of their position was complete. Porter hit some keys, and a projection appeared above her console. It showed Destiny's course. Porter zoomed in on a section, and 2 red dots appeared. One at the top of the display, which was marked as Destiny, and one at the bottom, which Mackenzie figured was Spira. There were 3 galaxies between 2 ships. "Let's hear it, Doctor." "This is Galaxy Destiny 3. She let out a sigh of relief. They made it across the void, but, she swallowed, there is no way to know if Illy Wallace is still alive. Mackenzie put his hand on her shoulder. She took a deep breath and continued. "We are here in Galaxy Delta Alpha. Based on this, we are approaching the edge of this galaxy. There should be 8, maybe 9 more stops before we leave it. So now would be a good time to get the beta site reinforcements aboard," Mackenzie said. "What do you need, Colonel?" "Well, we have plenty of people who are qualified to fly the puddle jumpers," Vale began. "But, right now, Sergeant Tizalo and Private Patterson are the only full-time pilots we have. We need 6 full-timers, preferably rated on jumpers and F-302s. "What about the other 6 slots?" "I'd like 4 extra security people." Right now, the count was 8 out of 90. "And 2 more medical people. We need 2 people to train as medical experts on the Ursini and Nakai. Some of our alien volunteers have first aid training for their species, but I want more." "Okay, we'll make it." Mackenzie was cut off by a beep from the empty science console next to Porter. He sat down at the console and hit several keys. "What?" "I did my homework." Mackenzie had read everything he could on Destiny and practiced on a duplicate console that the Air Force had built in his office at his request. "And we have 2 Stargates in range now." "Sergeant Tizalo, drop us out of FTL," Vale said. As the ship dropped out of FTL, Mackenzie was suddenly back on Earth. He was standing in the briefing room at Stargate Command, but before he could say anything, he was back aboard Spira. He turned to Vale. "How did the expansion take the drop out?" "0 damage, sir." "Good." He turned to O'Neill. "General, I believe we have some work to do." "Yes, sir." The 2 of them headed for the briefing room. Mackenzie had a feeling that this would not be as easy as advertised, but he had no intention of giving up. He had said that he would make it happen, so he would. Spira Gate Room Day 8, 0920. Vale walked into the gate room and found Xander Henderson at the Stargate controls. He was already dialing the gate, while also getting the MALP ready. At the moment, they only had one MALP, but Henderson was already working on piecing together more units. Destiny had flying cameras ball called Kinos, which served as their MALPs. Alas, the Spira crew did not have any. "What do we have, Corporal?" "Two gates in range. One is locked out, so I took the liberty of dialing up the other." The gate connected and Henderson sent the MALP through. Vale looked at the screen and the telemetry coming in. The planet was a desert world with brown sand. There were, however, some palm trees in the distance, and the atmosphere read as breathable. Vale took out his radio and opened a channel. It had taken some time, but they had managed to tie the radios into the ancient communications system. "NR1 to the gate room," he said. "Repeat, NR1 to the gate room." They had put together 5 SG teams, except that instead of SG, they were using NR. NR1 was Nova Roma 1. The other teams were NR2 through NR5. Vale was in command of NR1, which was the General Recon team. He had assigned Allison Porter to his team to cover the science and engineering angle. Next came Private Alexia Patterson, who was the team pilot. She also had medical training. Patterson was from the United Kingdom. She had Caucasian skin, red hair in a pixie cut, and sharp blue eyes. Rounding out NR1 was Ji Yal, one of the Nakai volunteers. Before he had volunteered for the expedition, he had been a security officer over at Colony 1. Vale had not counted him as part of the security force because he had wanted him of his team. And if Ji Yal had been counted, he would have been gotten 3 new security instead of 4. With Ji Yal getting the last slot on Security Team 3, which would have left him 1 man short. For the last slot, Vale had considered putting Haley on NR1, but he had wanted her to command NR2, which was the science team. Her teammates were Nikita Aronov, Alexander Bennett, and Alec Carlson. Next came Security Team 1, which led by Major Teldy doubled as NR3. Security Team 2, which was Grogan's team, doubled as NR4. This was why he had asked Mackenzie for a 3rd security team. That way, he could deploy both NR3 and NR4 if he had to, while still having Security Team 3 aboard the ship. Finally, NR5 was the resource team. Led by Hetty McConnell, it included Andrea Jones and 2 new Assurans, Klaus and Frank. Both of the new Assurans were botanists. NR5 job was to make sure that the ship had plenty of water, food, air, and medicines. By overseeing several operations on the ship and collecting things off-world. It was not a very glorious duty, but it was key to their long-term survival. The door opened, and the rest of NR-11 came in. They had salvaged the doors from the airlock. One had been installed in the gate room so that it would be easier to secure the place if they needed to. The other was installed in the infirmary so that the quarantine room could be sealed airtight. In fact, they had used it in a makeshift airlock of their own. Porter and Ji Yal were discussing the mission as they approached. Patterson locked the door behind them. "So," Porter said, "are we flying or walking?" "Walking. The oasis is not that far," Vale said. "Everybody ready to go." There were nods, and they walked through the gate. 3A2B, 178. E2B 178, near the Stargate Day 8, 0922. As Ji Yal had expected, the planet was hot. But that was not what was on his mind. He was still surprised that Colonel Vale had asked him to be on his team. He was walking next to the colonel, his weapon ready. The Tory had given him a projectile weapon called a MP5SD. It included a device which removed the noise that normally resulted from firing it. He would never admit it, but he was actually quite proud of this sign of trust. E2B 178, he asked. He was speaking into his radio, which included a translator. Who named this world? The computer. Apparently it's some kind of translation of the coordinates of this planet. Colonel, may I ask you something? You want to know why you are on this team? Yes, sir. He paused. Some of the crew said that I was a token alien. They also mentioned two people called Taylor and Teal'c, who are apparently other aliens and also on SG teams. So. You thought you should ask, Vale said with a smile. That is why you are here. You're not a token alien, GL. You're good with a gun and you're not afraid to ask or give your opinion. I've learned the hard way that you need at least one soldier like that. Back when I was still a Roman soldier in training, we followed order without asking questions and it ended badly. He paused. I was away, delivering a message to another unit. They were ambushed by a group of robbers and wiped out. Since then, I ask questions. I see. He looked at the desert. You think anybody lives here? There are no footprints. So if they do, they haven't been to this part of the planet for a while. They continued to walk. It took about 12 minutes for them to reach the oasis. Major Haley had given him a Tory wristwatch and told him how to read it. There was a small puddle, which was surrounded by some grass and 6 palm trees, but no animals or footprints. GL took a pair of binoculars out his backpack and scanned the horizon. He spotted 4 more oases. If there is nobody here, we could send NR5 to collect as much water as possible. The puddle jumper should be able to carry a good amount. He paused. Does that mean that it would actually be puddle jumping? Patterson moaned and shook her head at the pun. Suddenly, Vale's radio came to life. =//= Haley to Vale. =// Haley said. =// We've had a development here. =// Vale here, he said into the radio. What's happening over there? =// The countdown clock just popped up. =// Haley said. =// It's at 42 minutes and counting down. As part of their programming to keep their mission going, Destiny's and Spira's AIs both limited the time the crew could spend on a planet. On board Destiny, there were countdown clocks throughout the ship. But aboard Spira, there had not been a single countdown clock in sight. Haley had suspected that Spira actually used existing displays to show the clock. Also, she believed that the AI had apparently needed time to adjust to the presence of its new crew. And from what he had just heard, she had been right. We've found several oases with water, Vale began. Tell NR5 to take Jumper 1 and bring the supply of jerrycans. =// Yes, sir. =// Haley said. =// Haley out. =// The radio went dead, and Vale turned to Porter. It will take them a couple of minutes to gear up and get here. Let's start testing this water for poisons, bacteria, and anything else that could kill us. Sounds like a plan to me, Porter said as she put down her bag. Even if the tests are all negatives, I still want to sterilize it and run it through all the filters in water reclamation system, just to be sure. Will do, Vale said. Porter set to testing the water. While she did that, Patterson sat down next to one of the palm trees. GL then sat down next to her. So, what is your homeland like? Wet. It rains a lot where I come from. She leaned towards him. May I give you a piece of advice, GL? He nodded his approval. Stop trying to bond so much. These things simply takes time. How are the tests coming, Doc? Vale asked as he sat next to Patterson on the other side. So far, so good, Porter said. I've already got a few negatives. What about the trees? GL said. Could they be of some use? He paused. And is it me, or do they look a little too normal? We have trees called Aerol trees that look just like that. I know that this is my first mission, but shouldn't alien trees be more alien? We call them palm trees on Earth, Vale said. And I'm afraid that some things are kind of universal, including trees. As for using it, the wood is simply too soft. How do you know things like that? Homework. I read a lot of mission reports while we were en route to the Hope Galaxy, Vale said. We have people on translating several of key reports into Ursini and Nakai, so you have some in your future as well. Yes, sir. Then Vale's radio came to life, and McConnell announced that NR5 had just come through the gate. Spira Mess Hall Day 8, 11:05. The mission to the planet had gone smoothly. They had collected a lot of water and come back with 3 minutes to spare. When the clock had hit 0, the ship had jumped back into FTL. G-Al was writing up his report on the mission in the mess hall. It was the only room in the Wraith expansion of Spira which was finished. He was writing it on a Nakai computer. The Tory would have called it a laptop, which was writing the report in Nakai, Ursini, and English at the same time. He simply wrote the report in Nakai, while the machine did the rest. He had just finished when Jennifer Haley approached the table he was sitting at. She was carrying a tray of food. "Lunch?" G-Al asked. "Yes," Haley said. "Report." "Done." He closed the laptop. But this mission was not really that exciting. We came, we collected, we went. "Trust me, enjoy it while it lasts." Haley leaned forward. "Sooner or later, trouble will find us, and when it does, you will miss these boring missions. Before I was at the beta site, I spent several years on a SG team. My team got into a lot of trouble, and whenever we did, I really missed the quiet missions." "So, what on the menu today?" "Tuna sandwich with milk and an energy bar." "Milk," G-Al frowned. "What is milk?" "You've never heard of milk?" Haley looked at him in surprise. Then she explained about cows and how they gave milk. "Didn't you have livestock on Colony 1? "No, we had heard about it. There was some kind of livestock back in Nakai Home Galaxy, but none of them were brought along when the planets were colonized. And we never did find anything like livestock on any of the worlds we visited in our galaxy." He shook his head in surprise. "Tory drink cow juice." "Yes, we do," Haley said with a smile. G-Al got up and went to get himself some food. Cow juice. This he had to try. As G-Al went to collect his lunch, he did not notice Aronov and Coulson watching from another table. The two of them had overheard the entire conversation. They had already finished their lunch and were now working on their reports on the Wraith expansion. "What do you think it will be like?" Aronov said. "Going through the Stargate for the first time, I mean." "You've been through the gate several times by now, Nick." He leaned forward. "And you've studied alien artifacts before. You'll do fine." "Thanks," Aronov said, "but I still think it will be very different than anything we have done before. And considering what we have been through to get to this ship, I think that's saying something." "Good point." "Speaking of different, I thought that our FTL drive needed at least 3 hours of cooldown time between jumps," Aronov said, "but we jumped out and then back in less than an hour." "Destiny needs 3 hours of cooldown time, but from what I've managed to wrestle out of the database, she has a Mark II FTL drive. The basic technical data on Spira says she has a Mark III FTL drive. So, the new and improved model." "I hope so," Coulson said, "because if we run into those berserker drones, we'll need every edge we can get." So, he got his feet, back to digging in the database. "Good luck." The two of them headed out. As they walked out of the room, they passed G-Al, who was busy vomiting into a nearby trash can. Apparently, Nakai and milk did not mix. Spira Bridge Day 8, 1657. Jennifer Haley leaned back in the command chair. Vale had covered the 0800 to 1600 shift. Since she was the second in command, it was her job to lead the 1600 midnight shift. The job of leading the last shift midnight to 0800 had fallen to Major Teldy. Since she was the only other major aboard and chief of security, Teldy was the third in command. When Vale or Haley was off-world, she would be the acting XO. She looked at the clock. Vale had ordered her to drop the ship out of FTL at 1700 hours exactly. Haley got up and walked up to the forward helm station, where Patterson was flying the ship. "Drop us out of FTL, and then check the Wraith expansion for damage." "Yes, ma'am," Patterson said, before dropping the ship out of FTL. "No damage reports. Spira has apparently totally adjusted to the Wraith expansion, ma'am." "Ma'am," Henderson said as he approached the chair from the rear section of the room. "I got the numbers on the FTL drive." He handed her a piece of paper. "The minimum cooldown time is 45 minutes. That is the big upgrade of this engine over the Destiny's model. But the minimum amount of time in FTL is still 4 hours, ma'am. Shut them down earlier, and you damage them." "Nice work." She gave him back the paper. "Actually, it was Alec who did most of the work," Henderson said, "and I've got some diagnostics to run, ma'am." And with that, he walked back to the rear of bridge. "Porter, how many gates do we have in range?" "3, Porter said, "but one of them is locked out." She hit several keys. "From the readings, I believe that the planet used to be habitable, but there have been numerous volcanic eruptions since the gate was put there. The sulfur percentage went through the roof, and now the atmosphere is toxic. And we don't have any spacesuits. Those had been lost with Nova Roma, so that is a big, fat no." "What's behind Gate 1 and 2? "Gate 1, she hit some keys, is on an ice planet. It's a small island in the middle of a frozen lake. The atmosphere is breathable, so we could send NR5 on another water trip if they use the puddle jumper. Gate 2, she hit more keys, is on a green planet. The siege ship spotted grass and trees, but no life forms bigger than bacteria. I recommend we send a team to collect as much wood as possible, and that they should wear hazmat gear. I have a feeling that we don't want any of those bacteria on board." "For the record, why didn't we wear hazmat gear on our mission?" Patterson asked. "E2B-178 was a desert. The bacteria count was way lower," Haley said. "Tell NR5 to gear up for a trip to the ice planet with Jumper 1, and NR3 will get us some wood." She looked at the countdown clock, which was at 3 hours and 7 minutes. "And tell them that are cleared to use Jumper 2. "Yes, ma'am." Patterson grabbed her radio and began contacting people. 2 days later. "Spira Gate Room Day 10, 0800. Carlson put the plank against the wooden beam and hammered a nail through it. NR3 had managed to bring back an impressive amount of wood. Because there had been nowhere else to store them, they had put all of the trees in the corridor. It had then been a race to turn the trees into lumber. If the wood dried out, it would crack and become useless, so it had been all hands on deck to get it done, and the crew had pulled together and done just that. Of course, the wood had been just half the equation. To attach it, they needed nails. It was here that the biggest surprise had come. It turned out that Klaus and Frank, who were on board as botanists, were actually both blacksmiths as well. Frank had explained that the new Assurans believed that one of things was holding them back as a race was that they did not have personal things, and that had included hobbies, so they had decided to change that. Frank and Klaus had both found that they were fond of working with metal. They had gotten the metal they needed by dismantling the railings of the spiral staircases that connected the decks. These had then been replaced by wooden rails, which ironically turned out to be stronger than the original ones. It was not the first time that Alec had noticed that the ancients had been kind of cheap when building Spira. In their infinite arrogance, the ancients had apparently presumed that the main ship would hold together and they would never need the backup. Fortunately, Alec already had an idea for an upgrade or two, but those would have to wait. There were enough planks and nails to upgrade all the walls on board. This was because they were also using glue to connect planks to the beams. The nails were there to make sure that the planks didn't come off if the glue failed. Alec was currently working in the gate room. He was putting up the planks, while Al and Haley were painting the wood. There had been some pondering about which color they should use. In the end, they had decided to go for white. They had brought some colored paint with them, but the cans were small. The plan had been to use that paint to make door signs and markings, but white paint was relatively easy to make, so they had. He had just finished securing another plank when Teldy came in. "So, how is our little DIY project coming?" "We're on schedule," Carlson said. "So what are you thinking of this little upgrade?" "I think Colonel Vale is doing some old-fashioned team building," Teldy began. "He's got this whole Captain America thing going after all." "I saw that movie. Rogers was only frozen for 70 years. Vale was in stasis for over 2,000 years. He glued another plank in place. "I wonder if that's part of why he was able to adapt. I mean, if it's a short hop, there are things from before left, but in the Colonel's case. He had to start from scratch, so to speak. Maybe it's easier." "Well, I'm not going to ask him, and I hope never to find out from first-hand experience." "Me neither," he said. "Now, care to help me with these planks?" "You got it." Teldy nodded, and the two of them got busy with the next plank. Neither of them had noticed Vale, who had been watching from the corridor. He had overheard the whole conversation. "Captain America, not bad," he said with a grin. "Better him than Tony Stark." He reached the staircase and headed for the bridge. There was work to be done. Spira Bridge Day 10, 1035. Tzalo had dropped Spira out of FTL. This was the third stop in this galaxy, and that was not good news. The original estimate had been that they would get 8 or 9 stops. But the last 2 days, all the planets had passed had been harsh and low on resources. And what had been there had not been useful, so they had not sent teams to any of them. They had dropped out now because there was a world with where they would be able to stock up on water. Vale stood next to Porter, who was manning one of the science consoles. "Any other gates in range?" "No," Porter said, "and this one is barely in range." "What do you think?" Vale asked. "How many more stops?" "I've been studying the telemetry from the seed ships, and it is not good." She hit several keys, and a short list appeared. 2 planets. The rest of them have poisonous atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and other fun and exciting prices. We really need spacesuits. "Alas, we don't have any," Vale said as he looked at the telemetry. "What about the hazmat gear? Can we modify it to handle some of the circumstances on these planets?" The temperatures thing looks like the easiest to handle. They might be able to put together some kind of cooling system. "Well, temperature would be the easiest modification," Vale snickered at that. "And if we use the puddle jumper, we might be able to send a team to E4X281 to collect several boxes worth of limestone. But that's it. I'll take what I can get. How long until we get to 281? It'll be our last stop in this galaxy. We have 6 hours to collect water here, then it's 3 days to stop number 2. I have no idea how long that stop will be, but after that, we'll have 1 day until we reach 281. Porter paused. "So, at least 4 days. Which should be more than enough time to modify the suits." "Excellent. In the meantime, I'll get this water collection going." Porter nodded, while Vale activated his radio and began organizing the mission. Spira Bridge Day 23, 0938. Spira had passed E4X281 and was now on its way to edge of the galaxy. The water collection mission had brought as much water as possible, with the main water tank having been loaded to capacity. Stop number 2 had been at a planet where they had collected several eatable plants for the hydroponics bay. Then they had reached 281 and picked up a huge stash of limestone. But now came the hard part. Spira had begun shutting down everything but the bare necessities. And now, she was mere minutes away from leaving Galaxy Delta Alpha. So Vale had ordered the bridge fully manned. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Vale thought as he sat down in the command chair. Tzalo and Patterson were on the flight controls, while Haley and Porter covered the science consoles. Finally, G-Yal was on tactical, and Coulson was leading things at the engineering stations in the back. Major Teldy had asked Vale to put G-Yal on tactical so that she could run a final check on some things, which was why she was not on the bridge now. Vale leaned forward. "Time," he said. 3 minutes, Tizalo began. "And the course plotting program is running. We should know how long the crossing will take soon, sir." "Excellent," Vale said as Major Teldy walked in. "Everything secured, Major." "Yes, sir. Everything checked out." "Good," Vale said as he stood up. He could see that the clock on Tizalo's console turning from white to red, tilde less than a minute, tilde the color change had been in a report from Dr. Rush. "Here we go, people." 30 seconds, Tizalo said. 20, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The lights dimmed and most of the consoles went dark. "Flight controls just went dark, Colonel. The ship is now on autopilot, sir. We should reach Galaxy Destiny 1 in." Tizalo hit several keys. 2 weeks, sir." "What about the other consoles?" "All the weapons are offline and shields have been dialed down to minimal power," G-Yal said. "Our long-range sensors are offline and short-range units are at minimal power," Porter added. "Console 1 is still working, but number 2 is completely dark." "Alec, what about the engineering consoles?" "All dark," Coulson said. "Well, I don't see any point at all of us staying here to stare at black screens. Tizalo, you and me will cover the first shift. Everybody else dismissed." Tizalo nodded, while the others began leaving the bridge. Vale sat at the working science console and checked the short-range sensors. They showed nothing. But Vale knew that everything was about to change. These first 23 days had been them settling in aboard Spira. When they got to Destiny 1, however, they would have to get work. This galaxy was where they had first encountered the home space Nakai, and they knew nothing about the chunk of Destiny 1 which Destiny had crossed before Colonel Young and company had arrived. Tilda not to mention that we still have to find Telford and his team. Tilda, part of him, hoped that they hadn't made it to Destiny. They had no idea what condition the ship was in, which meant that it was potentially a death trap. Tilda, and if it is, they'd be better off on a planet. Tilda because then they would have a fighting chance, and maybe Spira could find them. But first they would have to cross this void. So that was the plan.